Today's guest is an award-winning filmmaker, producer, certified parent coach, and the driving force behind The Disruptors, a groundbreaking documentary on ADHD that's flipped the script on what most of us think we know. In this episode, we go deep on what ADHD really is and what it definitely isn't. You'll hear how reframing it from a disorder to a brain type changes everything, why medication is just one tool in a much larger toolbox, and how schools and workplaces are failing to support some of the most visionary minds among us. We talk about the stigma, the struggle, and the surprising link between ADHD and entrepreneurial superpowers. So whether you're a parent, a leader, or someone who's quietly wondered if you've had it all along, this one's for you.
Hey everyone, welcome to Business Unchained, where entrepreneurs and business owners come together to power up on their journey to greatness. My name is Bobby Mascia, owner of many businesses, including my passion, a wealth management firm that specializes in helping entrepreneurs. My life totally changed when I made a conscious decision to design my businesses to run themselves, not me and my time. If you're looking to get unchained from your business, make more money, and have more time, listen to the experiences of other successful entrepreneurs here on Business Unchained.
Bobby Mascia is the founder and CEO of Greenridge Wealth Planning. All opinions expressed by Bobby and his guests are solely their own and do not reflect the opinion of Greenridge Wealth Planning. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for any financial decisions. Clients of Greenridge Wealth Planning may maintain positions in any securities discussed in this podcast.
Please welcome the disruptor behind the disruptors, Nancy Armstrong.
I'm really excited because, I've been following you since we first talked, and a lot of the interviews that you've been on and the movie, which is phenomenal. I love the cast. One of the things that I thought was super interesting was disruptors. There's always two sides of the coin. On the other side of disruption is curiosity, which I thought was very interesting. And as I start to break down even what will.i.am said when he said, it's a superpower, is, some of the things that I struggle with ADHD and some of the things that I just think the general entrepreneur population or just, entrepreneurs typically tend to either have self-diagnosed ADHD or some connection with it. I know my son's got it. So I thought this was a really good opportunity for us to open up the conversation and really dig deep into your documentary, some of the experiences that you've had, and how you might be able to shed some light for if it's yourself that's dealing with it, or if you have children that are dealing with it. How do you deal with it? Does that make sense?
Well, yeah. What I've been thinking about a lot is why has it been so difficult? I made the film because I didn't know what was going on with my firstborn child. Initially, we were kicked out of mommy and me class when he was 2 years old because he couldn't sit still like the other kids. And we cried all the way home. And, it just became this sort of like, what's going on? This charming little boy, sweet, funny, interested in the things he was interested in, but struggling with focus and sitting still and all those things. It really took, 8 years to finally get the diagnosis. And
wait, it took how long?
8 years from the time, he was 8 years old, basically, when he got the diagnosis. That was after noticing something is up at 2. His speech was delayed, which is really common. You hear all the time. I think it was like Ben Franklin, his speech was delayed. They thought he was, couldn't learn, and all this, historically, all these ADHDers throughout history have had the exact same story, which is really interesting. But we couldn't, we're living in Greenwich, Connecticut, and all the little kids are marching in a line, and our kid is just marching way outside the lines. So first it was sensory integration disorder. And so we started doing physical therapy or occupational therapy for that, behavioral therapy.
So where was your head at this point? Were you going crazy? Were you trying to come up with what's the stem?
Yeah.
Was your patience waning? What was going on with you in this moment? It
was a lot just feeling around in the dark. I thought, is this how hard parenting is? I don't remember this. I don't remember kids being like this. I was born in my household was like the Third Reich. No one was allowed to move. So, Generation X is a little more lenient in terms of parenting, but this was crazy. And I remember we went to Yale Hospital, and I'm trying to figure out why, he was eating sand. He was 4 years old and he was eating sand. And while the doctor is talking to us, my son is just like bouncing off the walls. And the doctor said to me, well, clearly your son is at war with you. And I was with my dad, who was born in 1926.
That's an interesting,
super strict guy. And he's sitting in the corner like, mm-hmm. And I thought, no, that's not it. That's not what's happening, but thank you. So then when, we'd taken him to a psychologist when he was 8, and the psychologist said, I want you to have him tested. And I said, okay. And for what? And he said, just take him to this doctor and have him tested. And so we took him, and he was, off the charts, ADHD.
Now,
and as we're sitting
were you getting plagued with unsolicited advice? Like, you need to do this, or you need to do that?
No
one was, because
no one touches with a 10-foot pole. It was, we were so isolated in this shameful place of, we're bad parents. Our son is struggling with behavior and sitting still and focusing in school. Nice kid, never got into trouble. Sweet kid. I liked him very much, but he wouldn't follow directions. He couldn't sit still. He couldn't do what he was supposed to do. Any kind of sequential process, not going to happen. And he was, struggling at home with relationships at home with his 2 sisters who played together a lot, and, that kind of thing. So, finally we got the diagnosis, and my husband and I are sitting in the room, and he's rattling off all the symptoms of ADHD. And Tim, my husband, just kind of goes, I have all those symptoms. And he said, well, it's genetic, So in one shot, we figured out that Tim had ADHD and that Jack had it. And subsequently, we figured out my mother, me growing up, Tim, his father, all 3 of our children, and we were swimming in a sea of ADHD.
But that's the amazing thing about ADHD is Tim is very high functioning. I am very high functioning. There are adults who are very high functioning and successful. And then you have all these issues with kids being forced to conform to the settings of school and how they need to operate as kids. How has that kind of played out in your home?
Well, it's interesting that you say high functioning, because school isn't built for children with ADHD. The more strict and rigid school has become, the less adaptive children with ADHD are to it. And now you get out in the real world. Pardon?
My middle son, I see him. He suffocates.
Yeah. Sit still and listen. There are the instances where you have a professor who is engaging and walks around and includes you in the discussion. And that's where a kid with ADHD will do pretty well. Or a teacher who genuinely likes them and thinks they're creative and says, you think very interestingly. Now you can engage a child. But if you're talking about a teacher who stands in front and talks for 50 minutes and you're not allowed to move, that is not an environment for a child with ADHD, because their brain is wired differently. And then once you get into your adult life, you choose what you want to do based on your skills. So it's not so much high functioning as it is you've chosen what your skill sets are adaptive to, and you can run with that. And in the case of people with ADHD, you have to find the right kind of difficult for your brain and run in that direction. And don't try to be necessarily to be great at the things that your brain isn't really wired to do well. The example I always use is, all 3 of my children say you have a whole auditorium full of middle schoolers or high schoolers. The vast majority of them can do the things they need to do. Get to school on time, bring everything they need, turn in their work, be organized, have an organized locker, whatever the case may be. But they can't step on the line, on the X on the stage and belt out a perfect solo and sell it and look like they do it every day and they're totally confident. They can't do that. They could never do that. The kid with ADHD can do that. They can do the hard thing. They can't do all the easy things. Stuff. So they have to gear their energies toward the thing that they're good at, the things that are the right kind of difficult, as Ned Hallowell says, and find ways to be on time and put processes in place. That's managing the challenges. So,
Yeah.
my husband still manages the challenges, but he really has zeroed in on what he's good at, and it's made him really successful.
Yeah. I even if I just think back to myself, my own experiences, school, high school, grade school was a lot of work. It took me a lot of energy. But then when I got to college, I crushed it. The
Mhm.
leeway that I had to kind of do what I wanted to do, be in the classes that I wanted to be in, carve the path, spend the time when I wanted to spend the time, ultimately gave me the freedom to succeed. So I could see that. It's you've got to kind of find where you gravitate to.
And you're lucky that you found something you wanted to study in college, because if you don't, if you're in the wrong thing, it's catastrophic. You're sitting there, sitting still in a huge lecture hall, or, again, I think people with ADHD are better in small schools. My middle daughter went to a very big school, big classrooms, wasn't great. For her, it's been more of a struggle. Now she's a senior, so the classes get smaller. She really starts to take more of the classes she's interested in. It's just getting easier and easier. But those first couple of years were challenging, and just being away from home. And but yeah, you were lucky that you found something in school that you really liked. And then you're lucky that you found something in life that you really like doing. So it doesn't feel like work, and you're high functioning at it because that's how your brain works. You found the thing that is adaptive to the way your brain works.
So as a kid, obviously you don't have that opportunity to experiment. You kind of have to fit the bill unless you found some other alternative way or your parents have found you another alternative way for education. What are some of the things that you see kind of on the forefront of ADHD, dealing with it for kids? Do you think that medication's ultimately the right answer, or is alternative learning situations the better option? Like, where do you see the medical industry, that just the idea of dealing with ADHD, where do you see that trend kind of headed toward based on, I guess, clinical results or information?
Mhm.
What does that look like?
Well, it's a lot of things. It's not one thing. So let's take the first thing, parent coaching, which is, I became a certified parent coach. That's an amazing place to start, because you can't really coach small children in executive functioning skills. That's where they're going to struggle. But you can coach parents on how to better handle situations in their home with their kids who have ADHD. So that's number one. I think first and foremost is get the parents coaching so that they know how to handle the day to day.
And where do you do something like that?
You have to hire a parent coach. And
You
there
hire a
are,
parent coach.
yeah, you hire a parent coach to teach you how to, and basically the
Deal with
parents
those
need help
situations.
before the kids need help. The
Oh,
parents, because what's
definitely.
happening in the home, the parents have so much power to make things better for their children. So they need the tools. That's one of the reasons I'm writing a book, is just to, we did the film, which is kind of broadly, what is ADHD and what isn't it? Because there's so much misinformation out there. It's the reason it's so confusing. Well, there's a lot of reasons, but one of them is that there's so much conflicting information out there that confuses parents and makes them want to rip their hair out. So the first thing is getting parents educated. And then the second thing is, it would be great to have more experiential learning. It's not good for any kid to sit there for 50 minutes and listen to a lecture. It's boring. I don't know what
Outdated.
brain can do it. It's outdated. No one can do that. That's not good for anyone. So experiential learning, I think there's a tilt towards that. There are schools that are just for kids with ADHD, and it's all experiential learning and engaging learning, where the kids are not sitting, they're moving, they're in groups, they're collaborating. That's all great for people with ADHD. And then the third thing you talked about, medication, is, it's a super controversial topic, mostly because the media makes it so confusing and so controversial. Every day there's like 5 or 6 news articles on ADHD. I have like a news alert, so I see everything that's coming out every day.
Okay.
And it never fails that there is some clickbait article on medication. And it's not because I think, it's complicated, but it's not because there's really a problem with medication. It's that there's a shortage of medication and there's a shortage of clinicians. So, for example, this study that was in an Australian paper, and Australia has 8-month wait to see a clinician if you think you have ADHD, if you're struggling with your child or an adult, 8 months.
Wow.
So they're saying, oh, it's better if you don't get diagnosed, and oh, it's not good to have medication. And, it's not based on any science or any research. So one headline says, ADHD medication shock. Children taking meds have lower quality of life than peers. Major study finds. And then when you drill down in the article, which I always do, because I'm kind of like, what? That's not true, but let's see what they're saying. The study is a limited number of participants. And they even say, results could be skewed based on the small study. So it's really just propaganda.
Well, I was listening to that panel that you did with the psychologist and the psychiatrist talking about the movie and talking about medication. And, it's interesting because you said yourself, clinicians, there aren't enough people who really understand how the medicine works.
Right.
And we went through a whole process with my son, Danny, where we started with one medication, moved on to another, had to move on to another, had to move on to another. But we had to have the patience and I guess the confidence that this was the right path, where I think a lot of people start to lose confidence because there isn't a silver bullet. People deal with these things in different ways, process these drugs in different ways. Their body interacts with these drugs in different ways. And it's not so straightforward. Like, you have a headache, you take Advil, or you take Motrin, it's the same thing, or you could take Tylenol, which is just another different type of anti-inflammatory. But there's a whole different scale of medicines or medications to be chosen.
Right. Well, there's 2 major categories, and then some other categories that people are finding work for them. The 2 stimulant varieties, which are methylphenidate and basically the Adderall category. And the thing on medication is it isn't one size fits all. You have to do that very painful trial and error where you try one and it doesn't feel good, or there's a side effect, or they just feel like it, you have to tinker around with the dose and the medication. And it's your child, and it's not a unserious drug that you're trying. So the whole thing is insanely unnerving and uncomfortable to go through. But if the child is struggling, it's one tool in the toolbox. And I say that because you don't just give medication and move on. The child needs all kinds of support from the parents, from the school. If they do have ADHD, they should be getting an accommodation, extra time on tests, or extra help in school. Like those are things they're due. That's the law, that if you test, if you have ADHD, then you get those accommodations. And some schools don't like extra time, and they say, oh, you have ADHD, but it's not severe enough that you need extra time. It would be saying like, oh, you're nearsighted, but you can just squint and see the board. You don't really need glasses. Like, you do. You need glasses. You can't see. So it's often frustrating, depending on what school you're in, to get all of those accommodations, but those are helpful. And I think the thing that's just really confusing for parents is really just the way it's framed. And that's another thing I wanted to do with the film, is reframe it, as Ned Hallowell's been trying to do so many years, from this deficit disorder model to just a different brain type. It's in the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Illnesses, but it's not a mental illness. It's not a disease. It's not even a disorder, I would say. It's a brain type. It's a series of traits.
So let's spend a minute reframing that, right?
Okay.
From the traditional, what people tend to think it is, versus, or have you worked to reframe that? Talk to us.
Well, it's neurogenetic. It's hereditary, like 70 to 90% hereditary. And it has been talked about, for hundreds of years. If you look at the literature, they think this is something that started in the beginning of man. And if it was a maladaptive trait, it would have petered out, but it survives. And not only does it survive, but you can point to all of the innovators and people who have driven the world forward and industry forward and business forward. And so many of them have ADHD, from Einstein to Edison, Walt Disney, a lot of presidents.
Well, it's almost like you need your worker bees, you need your
Yes,
visionaries, your creative
yes,
thinkers, the
yes,
people who are outside the box, the
yeah,
people who are inside the box. If everybody's inside the box, how far are we going to get as a society in developing new things, new cures, new ideas, new industries? If everybody just kind of marches the line forward,
exactly.
right?
And right. And where it gets confusing is, but it's a disorder and the kids need help. And maybe the adults do too. If depending on what career you're in, but for certainly if you're in school, you're going to need accommodations. So it doesn't feel like a super skill in school because that
Yeah,
environment is very
doesn't
difficult for
foster it.
ADHDers, but it's kind of environmentally dependent, which is different from, say, schizophrenia or bipolar. You're schizophrenic or bipolar no matter what environment you're in. But take
Yeah,
an ADHDer and put them in a studio with lights and cameras and a million different things happening, and now they're on. They don't. There's no maladaptive,
yeah.
piece of that. They're 100%. It's an asset. So that's why I think we need to think about it differently. And certainly calling it ADHD is problematic. And Ned Hallowell's been trying to change the name for years. I don't know what the name should be, but it's a trait.
So what's the
And
difference between ADD and ADHD for our listeners?
well, yeah.
Because I think we've heard ADD for so long, it's ADHD. What is the difference in thinking about the two?
Well, it's the same thing. They just changed the name to include the hyperactivity. The three most obvious signs of ADHD external are distractibility, impulsivity, and hyperactivity. And not everyone has the hyperactivity. There's basically the combined type, hyperactive and inattentive, and just the inattentive type. So I have two kids with combined type, and my middle daughter is inattentive. And she's very different than they are, but she has ADHD for sure. And we would have totally missed it if we hadn't had the first one and we're sort of plugged in to what the struggles are and what her struggles were. And as you know, I think we talked about this, girls are often misdiagnosed. They're not diagnosed at all. They just sort of internalize this, I am not smart. I'm not good at anything. I'm a mess. I'm all over the place. And so they are prone to anxiety and depression because they feel so terribly about themselves.
Well, and I think the people who bury it and they try to hide from it, they're just doing their kids a disservice because they're not giving them the extra effort, help, direction that they may need or guidance that they may need. And instead they're acting like it's not even there. It's not even a real thing. What are you talking about? My kid's okay. My kid's perfect. And I think the minute you could start to identify like, oh, you know what? This is an opportunity for some adjustments or to kind of harness some of that energy or focus their attention in a way that, they can pay attention and be productive. How much further would you get than trying to avoid the fact that it even exists and it's even there or presents any symptoms in your kid or signs in your kid?
Well, some people don't want the stigma. They don't want their child thinking about that. And maybe if they have sort of a mild enough case, if it's not causing impairment, really, everyone has a certain amount of distractibility and impulsivity and hyperactivity in our everyday lives. It's the degree to which it causes impairment across multiple settings. So if your child has a little struggle, but they're doing okay, that's a parent's and a child's choice. But I've seen many situations where it goes sort of, it's swept under the rug, these little issues. And then the kid gets to be like 16 years old and they're saying to the parents, I'm really struggling and I think I might have ADHD. Can I please see a doctor? And in those cases, the child goes to a doctor and is diagnosed. And you just wonder, maybe it would have been better to just
catch it earlier,
address it earlier. So, because the one thing that my pediatrician said to me when my middle daughter was diagnosed was, I said, oh, well, I'm not giving her medication. Like she's not that bad. She wasn't struggling as much as her brother was struggling. And he said, yeah, but Hope is a pretty confident little girl. And it takes a very short amount of time for that confidence to slide all the way down the hill. And she
That's a
is
good point.
struggling. In her mind, she is really anxious and really stressed. And so if it can work for her, it would be great. And then, and then all the other things. Make sure they're getting enough sleep. Exercise is so important. So, so, so important. There have been studies that if you give one group exercise and one group, a stimulant medication, they both net out in the same place. So,
I think that's super interesting because it's cutting it off at the pass. It's almost like, you can avoid it, but if you catch it earlier, how much better are you going to situate or set your kid up for success because they're not losing that confidence. They don't feel, I'm not smart enough, I'm not good enough. That could be destructive for the kid.
Yeah. And to say you're good at other things.
And to adults, we all need to feel good about ourselves in order to continue to be, the best we can be.
We need to find the right career. I mean, people with ADHD tend to gravitate toward super stimulating careers where the dopamine starts flying naturally, like emergency rooms or firefighters or surgeons. The girl in the film, Zara, her father was a surgeon, and he actually found out through the course of this film that he also had ADHD, of course, because his daughter someone had to have it. It's that genetic. And he stopped worrying about the things in his medical practice that he wasn't as adept at and just got laser focused on like transplant surgery. That's when he felt great. And his practice went through the roof because he figured out that his brain was different and he pushed his energies toward the thing he really loved and the thing he was really good at instead of going, I need, the paperwork, and just get someone else to do those things. That's someone else's skill set. And this interesting book by Tien Suo called Founders Keepers. It's a new book. And he talks about, the three things that every company needs to be successful. And it's visionary leader, the relationship builder, and the manager of execution. And so ADHDers are not in that last bucket. They are visionary leaders, sometimes because they're not good at following. I always say, maybe they have to lead because they can't follow. But they're also great people skills. Like they have great soft skills that are so valuable in the workplace.
There's a lot of business theories and books. I know Gina Wickham writes about the visionary and the integrator, how, the two-person team where you have the person who is kind of thinking outside of the box with the other person who's actually making it happen in the four walls. Dan Sullivan talks about your unique ability and focusing on your unique ability, similar to what you just said. Find the thing that you're really good at that brings the most energy, because if you can do that, and only that, or that select group of things that really differentiate you from other people, and build a team around that. The surgeon who became super successful because he narrowed in. I mean, that is ultimately the result. How have you kind of seen that in maybe your experience with your husband, or just in some of the research that you've been doing? Because we did say one thing to diagnose it as a kid, another thing to kind of look at it as an adult and go, I think I have that. Do you feel like most people self-regulate? Most people find this answer out by themselves? Do you think that they look for the answer? Or do you think a lot of people kind of live still feeling stuck?
Yeah. I mean, they're all of the above. I mean, if you're lucky and you find the thing that you're good at, or that your brain works differently, that's another thing about just being diagnosis and some form of treatment is you can get ahead of it. You can understand that your brain works a certain way, and you should not even think about sitting in a cubicle. I mean, when I graduated from college, I knew everyone was doing their resumes and applying to these companies in Chicago. And I thought, I'm not doing that. I can't sit in a cubicle. I'll kill myself. I can't be a cog in a wheel. It's not going to happen. I, got in my Chevy Nova and drove to Hollywood and became an actor. But that's a move. Super ADHD move. Like that's just hurl yourself into the universe. I had never been anywhere in my whole life. I was from a small town in Illinois. So apart from college.
One of the things that I'll admit, because it's in the context of the story, is, there's always perspective to story, right? And I graduated, I was going the investment banking route. I was taking my CFA, which is super arduous. I was going back to Stern for graduate classes. 9/11 happened. My parents got sick within 18 months of one another. And part of me looks at that moment. I was like, I'm a family guy. And I ended up doing the one thing that I promised myself I'd never do, which was get into the family business. But there's also another way to look at that is I was also doing something that was completely against who I really was because I thought I wanted to be something else than what I was. I'm terrible at sitting in a cubicle. I'm terrible at focusing in on tests and making sure that I'm going 3-year tests. Like how much of that was an out for me that I took because it was an out of getting out of that style of sitting, to your point, sitting behind a cubicle, being the good employee, like climbing up the corporate ladder. So I can relate to your comment of jumping in. That was my version of jumping in this Chevy Nova and maybe taking a hit at a chance at Hollywood.
Yeah, I mean, we're risk takers, and we sort of jump first and think later. And I've done that many times in my life, and have had different careers, and just kind of jump in. And I'm nervous, I'm sweating bullets, but I sort of like that feeling of. I sort of like that failure could be imminent unless I hustle, unless I pedal fast. So I put myself in those situations numerous times, and it's kind of exhilarating.
What about for people who do that, but they don't see the fruits of the success that you've seen, constantly finding themselves almost repetitively taking a leap and failing, taking a leap and failing?
I think if you're constantly taking those chances that something will pan out, the thing you can't do is there's a couple ingredients that have to be there along with the risk taking, and that is total commitment and hard work. If you're not 150% committed and willing to work harder than everyone else, then those things will fail.
I've seen a couple of people in my, in my time of being out in business where they were almost like the serial entrepreneurs, but they never truly had the follow through, and it was lack of commitment. Let me move on to the next one. And they were almost fooling themselves into believing that they were entrepreneurs, but they never truly got any success out of anything because they didn't see it through.
Yeah,
that's
you have to
probably a medication moment. I mean, I don't mean to joke about it, but
yeah, well, medication and maturity. ADHDers are 30% delayed maturity wise. So if most people are full maturity at 25, because that's when the prefrontal cortex is fully formed, the ADHDers are a little bit later. So 28, 29. I mean, I had a definite feeling of at 30, where I was like, first of all, I'm getting the out of here. This is crazy. I can't live like this anymore. And second of all, I'm going to become organized. I'm going to be meticulous. I'm going to eat right. I'm going to work out. Like I became maniacal. I swung the pendulum in the other direction, but that was because I had the maturity to do that. And I finally figured out how to commit. I think I was very, all over the map in my 20s. So I think you have to watch yourself. If you don't know you're wired differently and that commitment is something that you have to keep an eye on, you don't know to keep an eye on it. You don't know what you don't know. You just think, you're flying through space and there's something wrong with you. But if you know that your brain is wired differently and you have to focus on certain things like commitment and hard work and following through, that can be extremely helpful. And I think if you're an entrepreneur with ADHD, you need probably a partner with the other skill sets, a neurotypical partner who can do that piece of it while you are creating and innovating.
Now, what about some other, I guess, traits or personality traits or things that, people who are maybe in adulthood dealing with this, things that can kind of be that green light moment of like, ooh, or that light bulb moment rather, of, oh, we're talking kind of the same language here. I should probably, look a little bit deeper in terms of making the joke of ADHD and really trying to figure out if this is an issue for me.
So how can someone who's an adult understand that they might have ADHD? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, so they can try to figure out what's the right approach for them to kind of move through it or get diagnosed or deal with it in a more serious way.
Yeah, I mean, I think you would know if you are having trouble being on time, organizing your life, staying in healthy relationships. Relationships are deeply affected by ADHD also. If you're struggling in your life and you
What
feel like
about
you're not a
substance
good
abuse?
adult.
Do you see
Oh,
substance abuse as being?
well, yeah. I
Mm,
mean, if you don't know you have ADHD and you were never treated for it, um, drug use is a big problem. It's basically self-medicating. So there are I think 24 longitudinal studies that show that kids who took medication had much less of a chance of abusing drugs in adulthood because they weren't self-medicating. They understood that their brain was wired differently and they weren't trying to just, calm it down with alcohol or nicotine or harder drugs.
mhm.
So yeah, but that's a big problem. Um, Relational problems, drug use, crime, car accidents. Like there are a lot of things that can trip you up if you don't know how your brain works. So that's why it's another reason why it's so important to get a diagnosis and some sort of treatment plan, whatever that is. It doesn't have to include medication. That's just, again, one tool in the toolbox, but it doesn't help to ignore it. And, the prisons are full of people with ADHD, and there are statistics that show, life expectancy is lower among people with ADHD, undiagnosed, untreated.
So you said you have another project coming. You're going to be writing a book. What's
Mhm.
is the book going to be centered around the same topic, or where's the next project taking you?
So I made the film because the film had to be made, and I wanted Ned to do this film as well, and there was no film. They have films on the most inconsequential topics, but not one on this consequential topic that affects so many families in the United States, and people were so confused about it, and there was so much struggle. So I made the film, and it's a global film, which is great, and the response has been incredible, really totally positive, which was great. And in the course of promoting the film and touring it around the country, I had Q&As with parents. They'd schedule 30 minutes for a Q&A, and it would go for an hour, and then I'd have to stay for another hour to talk to parents afterward. And they had so many more questions. You got to do a documentary on this, or you didn't cover this part, or what about this? And so I thought, what they really are asking for is, what do I do at home?
Mhm.
How do I start? How do I get going? How do I get our family out of this?
Even you mentioned getting a coach, and I'm still. Where do I find a coach like that? How do I even get there? So I can only imagine how many times somebody's come up to you, and be like, "What's the next step? What's the go to?"
Yeah. Well, in those situations, I am the coach. I'm answering question after question of parents talking about whatever's going on in their home with their children. And so I thought the book could be a little more of our own personal story as a family, woven in with some updates on the characters in the film, and some sort of real world strategies and advice for parents on what matters in terms of what they're doing and what they don't need to worry about as much.
So it's
Because
a
I
little
think
bit
you
of
have
a
to let go.
memoir and a book with some guidance.
Yeah, no, I hate to say memoir, but I don't want it to be boring because ADHDers will get bored. It has to be not too long, and there has to be some storyline in there just so it's not boring. It's hard to read books by the clinicians sometimes that are just very clinical. Not Ned
Hard to
Hallowell's
digest.
books; his are all really good, um, but a lot of them are dry. And the film was very story driven. So I took a topic that I wanted you to understand and I wanted to change your mind on, but I wove in all these sort of really heartrending stories about these families, and you could see yourself in the parents and you could see yourself in the children, and the parents weren't perfect and it was really hard. And so I sort of want parents to feel that they're not alone. We're all in this together. We're a community, and there's nothing wrong with your child. They just have their brain is wired differently, like one of yours is. There was nothing wrong with you and there's nothing wrong with your child. It's just that as society has changed, and so it's more difficult. If you think about it, in the classrooms you grew up in, there were those kids that were rambunctious, you know, burnouts, we used to call them. They were
Mhm.
self-medicating behind the school, and getting in trouble. And those kids were probably the ADHDers, but they weren't diagnosed with anything. They were just bad kids. So it's not that we haven't always had people with ADHD. We always have, but depending on where you live and the expectations of the school your child is going to, it starts to look more and more like a problem. And not to say that all the kids I went to school with were problem kids, but maybe they didn't do as great in school, but they're very, very smart people. I had friends that didn't get the best grades in high school, but they were really smart, clever people. And turns out they have ADHD. They figured that out because their kids have ADHD. So they figure out that they have it. And I go, oh, I always knew they were so smart. And I never understood why math class was such a struggle.
I like the reframing because my wife, when we first started to deal with my son a little bit, she got me this book, and I believe the name of it was Fast Minds. And I started to read it, and I felt a little bit. She wanted me to say she wanted to say, hey, listen, you have these issues too. Read this book. And in reading the book, I just felt like the tone of it made me feel like there was something wrong with me. And I kind of put the book down. And I was like, not really interested. I'm doing actually really well in life, and things are good. And I don't need to read this book because it's not doing anything productive for me. It's making me feel worse about myself. So I think that the reframing it is super important for people to just accept it, because if you can accept it and start to think about things in a productive way, as opposed to looking at it and going like, yeah, that those are problems. Yeah, those are more problems. Those are more problems. And then all of a sudden you're like, do I really have all these fucking problems, or am I okay? Mm-hmm. That's how, I think that's a good thing for you to give to the world.
Thank you. Well, I think the thing that's important in the reframing is that it is reframed not just for children and parents, but everywhere. So teachers should not approach a child with ADHD with an eye roll and you're going to be a problem. They should approach them with, you're creative, you're curious, you're able to hyper-focus, you have interesting ways of solving problems, but we're going to need to work on your organization and your focus, and we'll put you in the front of the class. And here's a fidget toy so that, you can feel like you're moving even when you have to sit still. So I think, we have to change the minds of teachers, and we have to change the minds of employers so that they start to protect those creative, innovative, curious people in their organizations. Because as my husband says, that's the magic. There's math and magic, and we need that magic. And we've seen that all throughout history with all of those people I mentioned before. And there's a gazillion others, even in the film, David Neilman, Steve Madden, all these entrepreneurs that struggled in other companies. They learned what they needed to learn. They struggled. I mean, David Neilman was fired from Southwest Airlines before he started JetBlue. And then he started JetBlue. And then they fired him from JetBlue, I think. And then he started another airline. So, he's a differently wired brain, but we need him. And he's a little bit difficult, but they give geniuses a pass sometimes, because
it's like the worst employee. And it was kind of my kind of like point when I got back into finance and I started going my own route. I said to myself, would be the worst employee. Like, I have to do something to where I'm creating a path for myself to do what it is that I want to do. I cannot go work for somebody else. And I think that you're right. You hit the nail right on the head.
And that was me going to acting. Like that was a really kind of a crazy thing for a girl from Glen Ellen, Illinois to go do. But I didn't care. I just couldn't go. I couldn't go right. I had to go left. And that was an interesting experience. And, it makes sense. And then I left and I went to graduate school at a point where I was mature enough to change careers. And, I've changed careers several times since then. So I think you just have to kind of know who you are and know what you're good at, and not try to be good at the things you're not good at.
Yeah, that little bit of acceptance. And like you said, for the people who don't identify with ADHD and they don't deal with it in their own lives, if they're in some sort of a leadership position, whether it's a teacher or it's in a company, having the tools to deal with people who maybe possess some traits that would otherwise drive you crazy, right? So, oh my God, the kid's not going to pay attention. As opposed to dealing with it that way, it's, how do I get the best out of this person so that this way I have a great experience, they have a great experience, and it becomes win-win, as opposed to feel like I'm always in a losing battle day in and day out.
Yeah. And for parents not to get so wrought about grades and test scores and, all those things. I mean, your child has to go to school and they have to get through it, and you want them to go to maybe you want them to go to a good college or whatever their plan is to do. Maybe it's a trade. But I sort of got at the end with the third one, just be focused on what she's good at and her mental health. So when she was
a good person.
Yeah. And being a good person. And that's such a huge thing. You'll get a lot of grace as a person with ADHD when you screw up. People say, oh, but they're a great person and they're so kind and they're so respectful and they have great manners. Like my kids all had that. I knew those things were important. And so that when they did screw up, they had a little grace because people liked them so much.
Yeah. And with this society is so interesting because we've perpetuated that problem with school and grades and test scores and, getting the tutors and my kid's got to be the best. And, college isn't for everybody, but then all of a sudden it became for everybody. And then the hyper competitiveness raised the prices. And now, the ROI from colleges doesn't even make sense anymore for most people. We have created such an issue around this that is not let's say a successful formula for kids with ADHD, because they're more likely to have issues around that structure to begin with.
Especially if it's not, something they're interested in, So that's really key is to don't study the thing you should study. That's not going to work. Study the thing you want to study, or if college is not the right path for you, then choose another passion. And what I always say is get on the path. Stop thinking about the path. Just get on the path and then pivot if you need to pivot. But you have to be in motion. I think that's true for everyone, but in particular, that's true for ADHDers, is to put yourself in motion and you'll figure out what you want to do.
Well, it's interesting because Mark Cuban had made a comment, and his comment was, people tell kids, do what you love, like follow your passion. And what the hell do you know as a kid? You don't have any passion. Your passion comes from being really good at something and doing it and getting paid for it. And then all of a sudden you start to make money and it becomes a passion because you're really good at it. And I think that that's one way to look at it. Maybe if you're looking down the traditional, this is the path I'm going to follow. But for people who don't really follow the traditional paths, if, to your point, if you're not loving what you do, it doesn't matter how hard you work. You're not gonna work passion into your life by consistently doing things that are not bringing you any joy. So,
right.
Especially for the ADHD, kid that is.
Well, I think it's find what you're good at. I think more than what you're passionate about, figure out what you're good at.
Yeah, I like that.
Then you can gain competency and you'll feel good about it and you'll start to have some authority in that area. And then you will develop passion because you'll say, oh, this is my area. I'm killing it. And you're killing it because you chose something that you are naturally good at. And I think that's where the focus should be. And I don't know why they don't do, Myers-Briggs tests for kids, before they leave high school, just to see where their skills are so that they have an idea. They don't do that, but they should.
It is an interesting, we put our employees through, we used to do Kobe, and then we started to do DISC, because even just from the team that I've built here, the reason why we are so great at what we do is because everyone's kind of found their lane that they're really good. And we've developed the support structure around those key players. And I couldn't imagine if I had that as a kid, that direction as a kid, what I might have been able to accomplish. So I think that's a brilliant idea. Maybe that's project 3 after the book.
Well, that's what I did when I was switching careers. I knew I had to not be an actor anymore at that point. So I took a Myers-Briggs test, and law and communication or corporate PR came out, and I went to graduate school for that degree. I chose corporate PR because I was an actor. So that meant I could write and I could, do public speaking and creating campaigns. So there's these skills I already knew I had. So that was kind of a pretty smooth transition from one career to the next, but it was based on what am I good at? I don't want to fail. So what is it that I'm actually good at? And I'm going to work really hard at those things.
When you went through that and you got that direction, did you feel like that calmed your brain down a little bit? Was your brain hyperactive to think like, what's the next thing? Where do I go? What do I do? Shiny thing here, shiny thing there. And that calmed you down, or did you experience something different than that?
No, I think it just gave me a direction. I didn't even question. I went, okay, fine. That's what I'm doing. And I started applying to graduate schools and I killed myself to do well just because I was so terrified of failing. And it all turned out very well. But I think it was just nice. Certainly when I took the test and it came back what I would be good at or what my skills were, it wasn't a surprise. I said, oh, that makes sense. And you're the one taking the test. So you're giving that information that then spits back careers based on what you're inputting into that test.
I think high school would be a great time to go through something like that.
The first one, it's probably, I think, it changes over time, but just to give a sense, I think people are choosing majors in college based on what they think they should be doing. And that's not a good idea, particularly if you have ADHD.
Yeah, I could see my kids right now. They're, we're going to do finance. We're going to be, we're going to work with you, Dad. We're going to, I love what you do. You have no idea what I do. You see the surface of what I like. You see, you're on the outskirts of what I do. I tell them, I said, if you ever want to get into this business, if you ever want to work in one of my companies, I would love to have you here after you've gone and cut your teeth someplace else. But I don't want you to think that this is the only option in life. Like, go cut your teeth, find your passion, and maybe it's not working with me in an existing company. Maybe it's let's find out where you're going to excel and let's work together to maybe create the next company. If owning companies and being an entrepreneur is something that gets you jazzed up, don't pigeonhole yourself into what it is just available to you, because that doesn't have to be the only option.
Right. But that's also not necessarily where you started your journey. I think the hard thing for kids who have parents that are entrepreneurs is they don't realize that most of those people started out in one area and worked really hard, mastered that area, and then an opportunity came. And then the idea for a company, after you had all those years of experience, I think they see us in our sort of quasi-finished product form. And it's very intimidating and very daunting to them. So I'm constantly telling all three of my children what a disaster I was, how hard their dads struggled and all the pitfalls and things went right and then they went wrong, and all, so that they can understand that it's a journey and it doesn't start with success. Mm-hmm. It starts with insanely hard work in something that you are good at. And that's where you start. And you have to start at the bottom like everyone else. I think, kids forget that. They just see, again, the finished product and they want to get there. But took 20 years.
Yeah, that's funny because I find myself constantly going back to the beginning with my kids also when we go through that conversation of like, I was in hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt from building this company and didn't take salary for times. And it's not easy. And I find myself constantly going there when I feel like they're feeling too comfortable in their current shoes. Like, time out, guys. Listen, I really appreciate you coming on. I know you're a busy woman, and I'm really looking forward to the book that you're going to be putting out. When should we expect that?
That's probably where I'm just at the beginning of that process. So it's probably going to be a little bit of time. But in the meantime, your listeners haven't seen The Disruptors, they should. If they have ADHD or have a child or someone in their life, it's a great film to sort of cut through all the myths around ADHD and make people feel seen and give them all the right information from the top experts on ADHD, sort of debunking all the things that we think we understand about ADHD, which are completely wrong. So I hope that people will see The Disruptors. They can see it anywhere online, Apple, Amazon, iTunes, or I guess that's Apple.
So I watched it on Apple TV, and guys, it's really cool. I mean, you've got Howie Mandel. will.i.am, Paris Hilton, Terry Bradshaw, Steve Madden. You've got a couple of families that are going through it real time. It is a really well done movie. The project was, I mean, I that's why you're here. I loved it. I thought it was great. Thought it was super relevant. And I think you did a great job with it. I'm looking forward to the book. That's why I asked. I didn't mean to put pressure on you, but usually those things take about a year or two to put together. I'm looking forward to that. Where else can we find you if people are looking to just follow your journey? I just Googled you, and you've got 100 different interviews that you've been on, which you do
it's all
a
in
great
process
job
right now. I also want to shout out to Atlas Films, Stephanie Suktig and Kristen Lazord for the work that they collaborated with me on the film. Stephanie directed, and they're prolific documentarians and award-winning filmmakers. And so I just want to shout out to them because I think the film would not have been as effective without them. So you can find me at Happy Warrior Media, and the film is at disruptorsfilm.com.
Well, a lot of great takeaways. I think a really good story. And like I said, I appreciate your time. And that's a wrap. Thank you, guys.
Hey, guys, Bobby Mascia here. If you've been listening to Business Unchained, you know we're creating conversations that matter, real stories and strategies to help business owners and entrepreneurs win. We've been putting a lot of work into these episodes in our online community, bringing you content that can actually move the needle for your business. And we're everywhere: Instagram, LinkedIn, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, TikTok, you name it, we're there. So look, if you're getting value from what we're doing, please follow, subscribe, and drop a quick comment or like. It really helps us grow this thing. Just search Business Unchained and you'll find us everywhere.